Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, storks and vultures, the coverage of a royal baby in Britain and a media death watch in South Africa. Zimbabweans have a new TV channel to watch, one that isn't controlled by their government, just in time for this week's elections. A Turkish journalist calls out the Erdogan government and the media over the protests there. Now he's out of a job. And Seoul, searching for news on North Korea, going underground to get it. The international news media have spent much of the past 2 months camped outside hospitals. This past week, they were in London waiting on news of the latest arrival in the House of Windsor. Prior to that, they were in Pretoria, where Nelson Mandela was thought to be on his deathbed. The journalists who descended on South Africa were described by Mandela's daughter as vultures, circling slowly, patiently, awaiting what they thought would be the final chapter in the life of an extraordinary man. The story at St. Mary's Hospital in London, where the media pack was awaiting news from the stork, was a different kind of news commodity, the start of a life that will be lived in the media glare, a celebration of celebrity. The two stories reveal much about the two countries and the way the news media operate. Our starting points this week are the capitals of Britain and its former colony, South Africa.
It's been an extraordinary summer. Since June 3rd, I have been waiting for either death or birth.
I'd say of every ongoing news story in the world, Britain's royals are the worst reported.
We just go with the hype and report like everybody else does.
Journalists should be questioning the way that they've been covering these stories.
Not to minimize in any way the difficulties of giving birth, the most painful part of this particular delivery had to be the media coverage. It was prolonged.
After weeks and weeks of waiting.
Laborious.
Well, the latest is that we're waiting on news.
And worthy of medication.
Well, plenty more to come from here, of course. None of it news.
It was brutal.
If ever there was a story where you were going to get excesses of breathless description and serial inanities, it was the royal baby story. The reason being, there was this great Kate wait. There was this hugely extended period of time when you had photographers and news cameras parked outside a hospital with absolutely nothing happening. And even when things started to happen, what was there to report? That a woman had gone inside the hospital and was believed to be in labor.
I don't know anything. We know so little about this baby. If there's one story from this event, man, the palace has learned how to manipulate us. This is entertainment voyeurism. We're all waiting for Kate to come out with the baby, but everybody will have the same shot virtually. It's a bit crazy.
And so anything like that, and particularly with 24-hour news, brings out absolutely the worst, or depending on your sense of humour, the funniest in broadcast journalism.
We are expecting an update shortly.
Yeah, we think that there'll be some sort of announcement in the next few minutes, whatever that is.
Private Eye, the British satirical institution, parodied the media's overexcitement in just 3 words. And The Guardian mercifully gave readers who didn't consider the birth newsworthy an escape hatch. Republicans could click on a tab and presto, it was as if the whole scene at the hospital never happened.
In a way, it's a slightly problematic story for The Guardian because we're a Republican newspaper. It's a sort of quite a cute way of acknowledging that a lot of Guardian readers really don't want royal coverage, so they can opt out of it. I think it had about 400,000 hits, so a lot of people were obviously clicking out of curiosity, but at the same time, I think some people really do want their website news organisation of choice not to be covering the royal family.
In a way, Nelson Mandela is African royalty. There are few who would question his legitimacy, the importance of his story. Journalists began camping outside the Mediclinic Heart Hospital in Pretoria in early June. As the weeks went by, tension grew between the family and the media pack. There were few developments. It was the kind of information vacuum the media abhor. The reporting became testing. That's when a family member called out the media.
They are making themselves such a nuisance. It's like truly vultures.
I don't think that was fair comment, to be honest. I have a healthy disregard for our club, the media club, in that we are often too invasive, too in people's faces, especially at dramatic points in their life.
Some dignity, press guys.
But Nelson Mandela is a historical figure, so I don't think it was exploitative. It's probably not efficient to have this many journalists waiting for weeks for an event just to say that they were there. Mandela's death is exceedingly important, but let's report on them when they come, not wait for weeks and weeks just to stand on a box and say it's time.
Journalists came here with the expectation that they were probably going to be reporting on his death ultimately, and they were hoping that even though his health was critical, that they would just get some more information. Whereas what we saw from the UK media, and especially the reporting on the birth of the Prince, is that there was always a media relations person giving an extra bit of information, enough for the journalist to be occupied, report on it, and still generate some positive coverage for the family.
There is a real problem for news journalism with these sorts of events. Something that has at its core an imponderable, unknowable time frame presents really insuperable challenges for quality, because what it means is that you are going to have to be covering it because if you believe that there is an appetite but you're also frightened of missing the key moments and you don't know when they're going to be, it means that you inevitably do this terrible thing of parking people there and asking them to sound happy or sound sad and to fill time.
Eventually, the static nature of the Mandela story, the stabilizing of his condition, led the global media away from Pretoria. First, their lenses swung toward Hong Kong and then Moscow for the Edward Snowden story. Then a brief stopover in Cairo for the drama there, before focusing on the melodrama in London, which was reported widely, even in South Africa.
What it says is that Nelson Mandela's story became boring. It became stayed in the media, and therefore, who wants to report on something that everybody knows and it's nothing new, so let's go look for something new. The thing about the royal baby birth is that it still remains relevant for a specific target market within this country. It's just interesting, just before I'd come here, I heard one of the people on radio saying that why don't we get this coverage on the Zulu prince when he's born, or something like that? Why is there so much hype around the British prince?
There's like all kinds of news channels that broadcast in English, so it's easy for us to understand. We've got this big video wall in our newsroom, which has BBC, Sky News, CNN, and that was it for 15 years perhaps. Only recently we have Al Jazeera English. This comes in by the bucket load in our newsrooms. This royal news, it's continuous reporting, and that influences our decision making. Well, we think, oh, there's so much news and so much reporting on this, so it must be important, but it's lazy thinking, of course.
It's not just laziness, it's economics. London is a global media hub. Every major news organization has a presence in the city, some just down the road from the palace. It's ironic. Royalty is seen as glamorous, but this story is cheap and easy to produce. And celebrities are an easy sell, especially those who speak English, still the lingua franca of the global media. Add it all up, and it's an irresistible story. What it isn't is news.
He's a big boy, he's quite heavy.
Not really. Our Global Village voices now on the coverage of two very different news stories.
I have to say I find the Guardian's decision to allow its readers to opt out of royal baby news if they want to slightly strange. To me it seems like quite a cynical move by a paper that's really run out of ideas with nothing original to offer. Like it or not, the royal baby's news, and at some point the royal couple will start offering interviews, and you can bet your life the Guardian will be front of the queue.
The media's attention to the failing health of Nelson Mandela was particularly atrocious. They seemed quite deflated that in the end, after such a massive build-up, there was no demise, and I'm sure they had all their death stories ready, and in the end, for them, there's quite simply no news.
Time now for Listening Post News Bites. Zimbabweans will be voting in a presidential election this coming Wednesday, just as a new TV channel has been launched to challenge the broadcasting monopoly controlled by Robert Mugabe. The new channel is called First TV. It hit the airwaves July 18th, pledging to provide impartial, factual news to the people of Zimbabwe. The channel is being beamed in from South Africa by satellite and says it's hoping to reach 3 million viewers plus. That's about a quarter of the population. First TV can be seen through free-to-air decoders, which are popular with Zimbabweans, who say their country's state-run channel, ZBC, will favor President Mugabe in an election that many predict will be rigged. Heading up the new channel is Andrew Chadwick. He's the former communications director for opposition candidate Morgan Tsvangirai. So the government is saying that the channel's coverage is bound to favor Tsvangirai's movement for Democratic Change Party. Chadwick rejects that claim. He's also refused to reveal who is bankrolling First TV. The Mugabe government is pointing the finger at London, accusing it of meddling, and the authorities in Zimbabwe will not be making themselves available for interviews with First TV. Mugabe's information minister, George Charamba, said the government would be taking decisions mindful of the need to cripple this pirate television broadcast station. The demonstrations that shook the government of Turkish Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan are continuing to have repercussions in the country's media. On July 23rd, Yavuz Baydar, a regular columnist and reader's ombudsman for the Sabah daily newspaper, became the latest journalist to lose his job over coverage of the protests that began in May. Baydar wrote a column criticizing the government's handling of the demonstrations that never made it into print. Self-censorship is rife in the Turkish media. Instead, Baydar's editors ran a piece criticizing him for his anti-government position. Baydar then took his argument to the foreign press, writing an op-ed piece for the New York Times July 19th, calling out media owners in Turkey for putting their business interests ahead of serious journalism. According to the Turkish Journalists Union, the TGS, Baydar is one of at least 22 journalists who have been fired and 37 who have been forced to quit over their coverage of the protests. These dismissals and resignations are mostly related to censorship policies followed by some media outlets. The TGS said, "Our colleagues worked hard for the public's right to be informed, and they paid for it with their jobs." Yet another journalist has been murdered in Mexico, yet again for reporting on drugs and organized crime. The bullet-riddled body of crime beat reporter Alberto Lopez Bello was found in a river in the state of Oaxaca. Lopez Bello worked the police beat for El Imparcial newspaper and recently published several stories on narco-trafficking. Reporters covering the police beat in Mexico say they're often threatened by organized crime groups and the police who are supposed to be investigating those groups. State officials have vowed to fully look into the murder, and they may be getting some help from Mexico City. 2 months ago, the Congress there passed a law that gives federal authorities more power to prosecute violence against media workers. Since 2006, more than 50 Mexican journalists have disappeared or been killed, mostly at the hands of drug cartels. According to the U.S.-based Committee to Protect Journalists, the cycle of impunity in anti-press crimes has had a devastating effect on the public's right to information, especially on matters of crime and corruption. The government can begin to break this terrible cycle by fully investigating this crime. For 63 years now, the governments of North and South Korea have been in a political stare-down across a heavily guarded border and a demilitarized zone. The two media scenes could not be more different. North Korea's media are among the world's most censored, with just one television network, a state-run mouthpiece, pumping out the government line. Down south, journalists have to watch what they say about their neighbor. A vague, antiquated law prohibits the publishing of anything sympathetic to North Korea. Operating under the radar is a growing network of North Korean citizen reporters who work with media outlets based in Seoul, funded by the U.S., and staffed with defectors from the North. Equipped with not much more than mobile phones, those sources smuggle information out of North Korea that gets picked up by the mainstream media. They take risks with the apparent aim of showing the real North Korea to the rest of the world. There are journalistic issues, however. How does one assess the credibility of invisible sources? How can one begin to verify what they're reporting? The Listening Post's Gouri Sharma now on an underground network that's gathering news in North Korea.
The mystery of the woman in North Korea is over.
July 2012. Global news media is abuzz with news of Kim Jong-un's wife.
South Korea has confirmed carrying out its third nuclear test.
February 2013. North Korea's third nuclear test makes headlines. When former basketball player Dennis Rodman meets with the Supreme Leader, news outlets around the world cannot get enough of the story. The more inexplicable North Korea's actions get, the more isolated and hermetic the country becomes, The more journalists it locks out, the more information it locks in, the more the news media are fascinated by the story.
You can't really compare covering North Korea to covering any other region in the world in kind of normal journalism activities.
If you are very lucky to get inside North Korea, you are not going to see much, and you are not going to be shown much. Foreign journalists cannot freely move around. There are always North Korean minders, usually 2 of them, who follow the person.
And therefore, we have to be very careful in terms of how we judge what can be objective and try to isolate real fact from maybe exaggeration. Many of us haven't been there, and we don't get to talk to any of these sources.
Yes, it's possible.
That's where journalists like Shin Joo-hyun step in. Shin, a South Korean, is the editor of a Seoul-based website, Daily NK. Set up in 2004, the site has become a regular source for global news organisations like the New York Times, CNN and the BBC. Shin says he has an underground network of correspondents in North Korea, which feeds the outlet news from the inside.
People perceive North Korea to be a negative and surreal country. In particular, the US perceives North Korea to be very strange. However, we at Daily NK have managed to show how real North Koreans live, their ideologies and their dissatisfaction of the North Korean state.
If we rely on traditional news approaches towards North Korea, then we get a lot of focus on the security issues or the political issues, because that's easy for Western journalists to focus on.
We have revealed aspects of the country that the North Korean leadership does not want exposed, such as their concentration camps. Our website has come under cyber attacks from the North Korean state. The attacks closed our site for up to 5 hours at a time. The fact that we are getting this sort of reaction indicates that our coverage is having an impact.
There are a number of these Seoul-based organizations which have been reporting on North Korea from within North Korea. There is the Daily NK, which is probably the largest and most ambitious of them. There's Radio Free Chosen, which is a radio station. There is Rimjingang, which is a written publication that's authored by people in North Korea, and then the writings are smuggled out and edited in Japan. Rimjingang and the Daily NK in particular actually are creating and reporting brand new news, breaking stories, and really acting as a sort of traditional news outlet does.
We basically have very good information as a result about the daily life of the average North Korean. We know what she or he reads, eats, buys, how much he or she pays for a particular commodity, and so on. Just 10 years ago, 15 years ago, such knowledge was simply impossible.
What makes this kind of information available now is the growing web of undercover citizen reporters, North Koreans equipped with mobile phones, willing to take huge risks to report on happenings inside the country. Conversations are secretly recorded and video is covertly filmed in North Korea. Because the border with South Korea is heavily patrolled, the material is smuggled out over North Korea's northern border with China, and then couriered back south to media outlets based in Seoul.
There is no legal way of directly contacting North Koreans. 70% of North Korea's boundaries are shared with China, and because of this, Chinese mobile network services extend into territories along the border. Using these networks, we are able to make direct phone calls to North Korea. We also communicate via email sometimes. Secondly, we collect information from our sources ranging from public officials, people visiting their relatives, and our own correspondents. There are also other methods of communication I cannot disclose.
A number of these organizations started to kind of cultivate sources. They would work with them and actually teach them how to use video cameras, teach them how to edit using laptop computers, teach them how to record things, how to sort of do essential basic reporting. They even taught them how to follow people in a crowded space so they could sort of tail people, that kind of thing. So they did quite a bit of journalism education.
These kind of news organizations that are getting information out of the ground level of North Korean society are really opening up a window to this new world of information, this new picture. And so this information flow is bigger than we know, really.
But given the way the information is sourced and the number of hands it goes through, questions have been raised about the credibility of the sources, verification of the information, and how it can be manipulated before being broadcast in Seoul.
We do have more information today compared to at the end of 1990s, but that does not mean that the quality of the information can be so reliable. So we do have, in terms of quantity, more information and more awareness of what could be going on in North Korea. So that kind of sort of is helpful for a lot of scholars. But for journalists to directly quote that as one sourcing of information regarding North Korea, I think it sort of doesn't really stick to the good journalism practice.
It seems that international media relies very heavily on these kinds of sources. It may be very difficult for them to verify, but if we pay sources, which may be necessary in North Korea, then we should work very hard to verify that information and make sure these sources are not just giving information that they know is going to sell. So we need to have multiple sources and then cross-check between them to make sure that it's credible information.
For a country as secretive as North Korea, where authorities say government-approved news is the only news that counts, some news, however it is sourced, is better than none at all.
More Global Village voices now on the news coming out of North Korea.
We get a lot of photos, videos from North Korea every day, but most of these have little or no news value. And that's where the citizen journalists come in, because they show us something unique. Citizen journalists like An Chol and Rim Jin-gang first showed us images of malnourished and begging children in North Korea, something we read a lot about, but which we actually never see images of.
Listening to North Korean stories directly from North Koreans themselves is a groundbreaking thing. The question here is, however, how many of these are actually true, and is there any exaggeration? If you read those reports very closely, they are telling from the perspective of a victimized witness rather than a journalist. It is understandable because they're defectors and not trained journalists. However, some stories are even doubted within the defector community.
Of course, there's problems with relying too much on this form of media. We've always got to bear in mind that this is just one part of a bigger picture. Nevertheless, even if we accept that we have to view this material with some suspicion, it's been my experience that they prove to be right much more often than they prove to be wrong.
Finally, a video of the week that's a bit different for us. Back in February, the South Korean Air Force put together a parody of the musical Les Miserables, designed to inspire a sense of national duty. That opening scene from Les Mis of beleaguered dock workers hauling in a boat gets turned into conscripts clearing snow from a runway in case the Air Force is called into action over a threat from the north. Now, there's only one professional actor in this, and it still has almost 5 million hits on YouTube. Les Militaribles is our web video of the week. We'll see you next time at the Listening Post.
I dreamed a dream 어릴 적에 흰 눈밭에 썰매 타고 양발장 가서 제설해야 돼